John had never been good with people. Even as a child, he preferred quiet spaces, shadowed corners, and the company of machines over humans. Life on the distant mining colony suited him perfectly, isolated, calm, and predictable. He could go days without speaking to anyone, and no one would think him strange. That was until Leary arrived. Leary was not human. She was a Meridian, tall and slender with silver-toned skin that seemed to shimmer softly in the dim lights of the colony. Her eyes glowed faintly, a soft blue that made her look almost ethereal. She had been assigned to serve John, a domestic assistant, though she carried herself with a quiet dignity. She moved with grace, her gestures precise and efficient. She cooked, cleaned, maintained the systems, and even repaired machinery without complaint. Every day she reminded John that he was not completely alone, even if he liked to pretend he was. The first evening she arrived, John had been nervous. Humans often looked at aliens with fear or suspicion, but he felt something different when he saw Leary. There was no judgment in her eyes, no curiosity or mockery, just presence. She had been programmed to serve, yes, but there was a softness about her that made John uneasy in a good way. He tried small talk. "Do you like it here?" he asked awkwardly. She turned to him, tilting her head slightly. "I perform my tasks as instructed. I do not require pleasure or discomfort, human." But her voice carried warmth. It was polite but somehow comforting. John nodded, feeling embarrassed that he had asked something so pointless. Days passed, and John watched her move through the house with effortless grace. She never spilled a drop of water, never let a tool lie out of place, never faltered in her duties. Yet there were moments when she paused as if observing him, not just his body but his mind. Sometimes she would stand by the window silently, watching him stare into the barren desert outside. Her quiet presence was strangely comforting, like a lamp in the dark. Despite the routine, John felt a tension he could not explain. He wanted to remain alone, untouched by anyone's gaze, yet Leary had a way of seeing him without words. She seemed to notice the subtle tremor in his hands when he thought no one was watching, the way he sometimes slumped in exhaustion as if carrying a weight no one else could see, and though she never commented, her presence made him aware of the loneliness he had buried for years. One night, after a long day repairing machinery in the colony's outer tunnels, John came back exhausted. Leary had prepared dinner, the smell of steaming food filling the small kitchen. "You should rest," she said softly. John hesitated, unused to such concern. I will," he muttered, settling down at the table. She poured him a cup of tea and placed it in front of him with a grace that seemed almost human. As he ate, John couldn't help but notice how meticulous she was. Every dish cleaned, every item in its place, every surface polished until it reflected the dim light. And yet there was no coldness in her work. Every action had a rhythm, a quiet elegance that suggested care. For the first time in years, John felt that maybe someone or something truly cared about his life. It was a strange sensation, unsettling yet comforting. He wanted to pull away, to retreat into his shell, but a part of him wanted to watch her, to see her move through the room, to feel that someone was silently protecting him. And in those moments, John felt something he had not felt in years. Hope. Hope that he was not as invisible as he had thought. Hope that someone, even an alien, could understand the silent struggles of a human heart. And though he would never admit it out loud, he felt a strange bond forming with Leary, one that went beyond master and servant. That night, as John lay on his bed, listening to the hum of the colony's systems, he caught a glimpse of Leary standing by the window. Her glowing eyes reflected the faint starlight outside. She did not speak. She did not move. She simply watched quietly, patiently, and for the first time John allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he was not alone in the universe after all. John had always been careful. Careful with words, careful with actions, careful with who he let into his life. Years of survival in harsh situations had taught him that showing weakness was dangerous. And yet, Leary's presence had begun to pierce through the walls he had built around himself. He had a secret, a part of him that he could never share. Before arriving at the colony, John had been a soldier, but not just any soldier. He had served in classified missions, operations so secretive that even most humans did not know they existed. He had made choices that haunted him every day, choices that had saved some lives but cost countless others. Faces of the lost often appeared in his dreams, staring at him with silent questions that he could never answer. He kept this part of himself buried deep, even from Leary. After all, she was his servant. Her purpose was to clean, to cook, to assist. She was not meant to see the darkness that lingered in his mind, and yet sometimes when he thought no one was looking, he caught her watching him in ways that felt too knowing, too curious, too alive. One evening, John found himself in the common room, staring blankly at the flickering lights above. Leary was quietly polishing the table, moving with her usual precision, but there was a stillness about her that made him uneasy. He wanted to speak, to tell her about the nights he spent reliving past missions, the moments that left him shaking and cold. But he could not. Words had always failed him in these confessions. Instead, he spoke of trivial things. "The weather will be bad tomorrow," he said softly, more to hear the sound of his voice than to make conversation. Leary glanced at him, her glowing eyes calm and unwavering. "Weather predictions are unreliable on this sector. Systems indicate a 60% chance of storms," she replied. Her voice was factual, but there was something in it, a tone that made John's chest tighten, as if she understood more than she let on. That night, sleep did not come easily. John lay on his narrow bed staring at the ceiling, replaying memories he had long tried to forget. The faces, the explosions, the moments when he had chosen duty over mercy, and beneath all of it the guilt gnawed at him, relentless and cruel. He had carried it alone for so long. No one had ever seen it. No one had ever acknowledged the weight of his soul. He did not notice Leary standing in the doorway at first. She had not made a sound. Her glowing eyes reflected the dim light of the room. She did not ask him to speak. She did not comment on the tension in his body. She simply stood there observing, silent but present. John felt exposed even though he had not said a word. There was something in Leary's gaze that made him feel as though she could see straight into him, past the armor of solitude, past the walls he had built around his life. He quickly turned away, embarrassed by the vulnerability he could not control. "Go back to your duties, Leary," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. But she did not move. Instead, she stepped closer, her movement fluid and calm. "Human," she said softly. "Your mind carries burdens far heavier than these walls can hold. You need not hide from me." Her words shocked him. No one had ever spoken to him like that before. Not a friend, not a comrade, not even a superior. It was not fear or judgment in her tone. It was understanding, recognition. And it left him feeling both exposed and strangely comforted. For hours he lay awake, torn between fear and relief. Could he trust her? Could he allow someone, even a Meridian servant, to see the truth about him? The thought was both terrifying and tempting. Perhaps after years of carrying everything alone he could let someone in, and yet the walls remained. He told himself he could not share. He told himself that even if Leary understood, she would never truly comprehend the human cost of his actions. She was not human. She would never feel the guilt, the grief, the shame that clung to him like a shadow. And still in the quiet of the room he found himself wishing she could. The night stretched on, long and silent, until John finally drifted into a restless sleep. Leary remained in the doorway watching him, her glowing eyes soft but alert. For the first time, she seemed to sense the depth of his pain without a single word spoken, and though she did not intervene, her presence alone brought a strange sense of peace to John's troubled heart. For the first time in years, John realized that perhaps he did not have to face the darkness entirely alone. Perhaps one day he could share the truth. Perhaps someone, no matter how different, could help him carry the weight he had long borne by himself. And in that realization, a tiny spark of hope began to grow. A spark that would soon ignite into something far greater than he could yet imagine. The colony was quiet that night. Outside, the barren landscape glimmered faintly under the twin moons, and the hum of distant machinery echoed softly through the halls. John sat in the control room reviewing the energy systems for the day. His mind wandered, as it often did, to memories he preferred not to remember. Missions, explosions, decisions that had cost lives. The weight of it pressed on his chest like a heavy stone, and he felt the familiar ache of solitude. Leary was in the adjacent room, her movements calm and methodical. She checked the storage units, polished the metal surfaces, and ensured the backup systems were functioning. Her glowing eyes flickered softly in the dim light, reflecting a quiet vigilance. John often felt comforted by her presence, but tonight, he barely noticed her. His thoughts were tangled, dark, and persistent, the past clawing at him in ways he could never fully escape. Suddenly, a soft alarm echoed through the control room. A system malfunction had triggered an emergency scan. The lights flickered and a panel opened automatically. John frowned, reaching for it, but before he could react, Leary entered the room. Her eyes widened faintly in the pale glow. The screen had already activated a holo recording, one of John's past mission logs classified and hidden. Images flashed across the display, battlefields, explosions, and faces of people he had lost. Leary froze. The Meridian Code was clear. Never view a human's private history without consent. Yet here she was, staring at the truth about her master. Her glowing eyes softened and she stepped closer, careful not to touch the controls. She could see the young soldier John once was. The man who had carried impossible weight. The human who had survived against all odds. John turned just in time to see her. "Leary!" he exclaimed, panic and fear rising in his chest. He rushed forward to shut the console, but it was too late. She had already seen. He could read it in her eyes, the recognition, the shock, and something else. Something almost like understanding. For a moment, the room was silent. The hum of machinery was louder than any words. John's mind raced. No one had ever seen this side of him. No one had ever understood the things he had done, the sacrifices he had made. He had hidden it all, buried it deep inside, and now it lay bare before Leary, his alien servant. He wanted to push her away, to demand she look away, to return to the safety of his walls. But her gaze held him. There was no judgment, no fear, no mockery, only quiet comprehension. She did not speak, but he felt her presence like a steady hand on his trembling shoulder. Why are you not afraid?" John finally whispered, his voice cracking. He had expected anger, disgust, maybe even horror. But Leary only tilted her head slightly, her glowing eyes calm and serene. "Human," she said softly. "Your past is heavy, but it does not define your worth. I see the weight you carry and I recognize your strength." John's chest tightened. Strength? After all these years of shame and guilt, someone, an alien no less, was calling him strong. He wanted to laugh, but the sound caught in his throat. He wanted to cry, but the tears had not yet come. He felt exposed in ways he had never imagined. Yet there was no danger in the exposure. Instead, there was acceptance. The holo recording continued to flicker, showing scenes he had long tried to forget. Explosions, moments of life or death decisions, soldiers falling beside him. And yet Leary did not flinch. She did not look away. She simply stood there, silently witnessing his truth. John sank into a chair, his hands covering his face. I thought no one could ever understand," he admitted. His voice was barely audible. "The things I've done, the lives I've taken, the people I couldn't save. It haunts me every day." Leary approached cautiously, her movements deliberate and gentle. She placed a hand near his shoulder, not on him but close enough that he felt the warmth of her presence. "Human," she said again, "you have survived what few could. You carry this burden not because you are cruel, but because you are capable. You are extraordinary because you continue despite the pain. For the first time, John felt the tension in his chest ease. Even if only slightly, someone had seen him. Someone had witnessed his truth and not recoiled. Someone, of all beings an alien, had recognized his humanity. The night stretched on, silent except for the soft hum of the colony systems. John did not return to the control panel. He did not erase the holo recording. Instead, he remained seated, staring at the flickering images while Leary stayed near him, her glowing eyes steady and unwavering. And in that quiet companionship, John realized something he had not known in years. He was not as alone as he had believed. For the first time, he allowed himself to hope that someone, even someone unlike him, could truly understand. The room was quiet, yet it was heavy with unspoken words. John sat slouched in the control room chair, staring blankly at the holo recording that still played the ghosts of his past. Leary stood nearby, her glowing eyes soft but unwavering, as if she could see the pain etched into his very soul. For hours they remained like that, one human and one alien, linked by something neither could name, yet both felt. Finally, John broke the silence. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "You've seen it all. Everything I've tried to bury." He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture he did when overwhelmed. "And yet, you're still here. You didn't run. You didn't judge me." Leary tilted her head, her silver skin catching the dim light. "Human," she said softly. "I do not fear what you have done. I do not judge. I see only what you are now, and what you have endured. That is enough for me to understand." John's chest tightened. Enough to understand? Could anyone ever truly understand the burden he carried? The memories of people lost in explosions, the decisions that cost lives, the missions that haunted him in every silent moment. He had never told a soul. Not a friend, not a family member, not even the officers who had served beside him. No one had seen this side of him. And now an alien, a being so unlike himself, had witnessed it all and yet remained. He wanted to speak, to pour out everything he had locked away for so many years. But words felt fragile, insufficient. How could he explain the fear, the guilt, the endless nights of silent torment? And yet he knew he could not remain silent any longer. Not with Leary, not with someone who had already seen the truth. I have carried it all alone," he admitted, his voice breaking. "The missions, the deaths, the mistakes I made. I thought I had to face them alone. No one can carry this weight but me." He looked up at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "And now, you've seen it. I don't know what to do anymore." Leary moved closer, her presence gentle yet grounding. "Human," she said softly. "Carrying a burden alone does not make you strong. Strength is not only in survival, but in letting others help you bear the weight. Even if you are different from me, even if I am alien, you do not have to face it alone." John swallowed hard. Her words were simple, but they carried a truth he had long avoided. Strength, survival, humanity. She was calling him extraordinary, not for what he had done in battle, but for continuing to exist despite the pain. She saw his suffering and recognized it as part of his courage. He took a deep breath, the first real one he had felt in days. "I never wanted anyone to know," he confessed. "I never wanted anyone to see. The person I was, the things I did, the people I lost. I thought it would destroy me if anyone saw, but now, I don't know if I can hide anymore." Leary's glowing eyes softened even further, a rare sign of empathy among her kind. "You do not need to hide. You are human. You are flawed. You are strong. And it is these things together that make you remarkable." John closed his eyes, feeling an unfamiliar weight lift slightly from his chest. He had carried this secret for so long, and the act of confessing, even in fragments, to someone who truly understood was freeing. He realized that vulnerability was not weakness. It was perhaps the first step toward healing. For the first time in years, he felt seen, not as a soldier, not as a survivor, not as a man who carried guilt, but simply as John, a human being capable of pain, capable of hope, capable of being extraordinary in ways that went beyond the battlefield. He opened his eyes and met Leary's gaze. "Thank you," he whispered, "for staying, for not turning away, for understanding, even though you shouldn't have to." Leary inclined her head slightly, her expression serene. "It is what I do, human. I serve, yes, but I also observe, and understanding is part of that service. You are not alone anymore if you choose not to be." John nodded, a small smile forming despite the exhaustion etched on his face. The confession had not solved all his pain, but it had begun a new chapter. A chapter where he could carry his past without hiding, where someone, even an alien, could witness his truth without fear or judgment. And in that quiet moment, a fragile hope ignited within him. For the first time in years, John believed that perhaps the darkness he had carried so long could be shared, and that in sharing it he might finally find light. The following days were quiet but charged with a new energy. John moved through his routines differently now. There was a weight lifted from his chest, though the memories of the past still lingered like shadows at the edges of his mind. Leary noticed it immediately. Her glowing eyes followed him as he walked through the halls, repaired systems and sorted supplies. But instead of her usual silent observation, there was now a softness, a patience, a waiting that seemed to invite him to speak if he wanted. For John, the change was subtle, but profound. He had spent years alone believing that no one could understand the burden he carried. But Leary had seen it. She had witnessed his truth and she had stayed. That simple act, something so small and yet so extraordinary, made him realize that maybe he did not have to face life entirely by himself anymore. One evening, after a long day of work in the machinery bay, John found himself in the common room. The twin moons cast silver light across the floor, and Leary stood near the window, her glowing eyes reflecting the quiet stars. He hesitated, unsure if he should speak, but the words tumbled out before he could stop them. I never thought anyone could understand," he admitted. His voice was low, almost trembling. "I thought that everyone would see the things I've done, and hate me for it. Or fear me, or, I don't know, just turn away." Leary turned to face him fully, her posture calm and her gaze steady. "Human," she said softly. "Understanding does not require approval or agreement. You carry experiences that are yours alone. I do not fear them. I do not judge them. I simply see them. And in seeing, I respect the strength it took to survive them." John felt a lump in his throat. Respect. Strength. He had spent so many years feeling only guilt, shame, and the cold isolation of survival. And now, standing in front of an alien, hearing these words, he felt something he had long forgotten. Validation. They spent hours talking that night. John spoke carefully, selecting words that would not overwhelm or confuse. He told her about the missions, the choices he had made, the friends he had lost, and the moments he wished he could undo. Leary listened without interruption, without judgment, without comment, only presence. It was not easy to speak. John faltered many times, paused, and sometimes had to swallow the tears threatening to fall. But each pause was met with the steady glow of Leary's eyes, her silent reassurance that he was not alone. For the first time, he allowed himself to truly feel his emotions, not to bury them in the cold shell of isolation he had lived in for so long. By the end of the night, John realized something extraordinary. He had shared a part of himself he had never shared with anyone, not even fellow soldiers or trusted colleagues. And yet he had not been rejected. He had not been condemned. Instead, he had been seen and understood, and that understanding had created a bond stronger than anything he had known. Leary stepped closer, her voice gentle, almost human in its warmth. "Human," she said, "it is not weakness to carry pain. It is not shame to acknowledge it. You survive because you endure. You survive because you care. You survive because you are human. John nodded slowly, a quiet smile forming on his lips. He realized that she was right. His humanity was not only about the mistakes or the burdens he carried. It was about the choices he made despite them, about the will to continue even when the world seemed unbearable. And in that moment, he felt a new sense of purpose, a spark of hope that had lain dormant for years. The nights that followed were different. John no longer moved through the colony with the same sense of isolation. He spoke to Leary more often, sharing small thoughts, even small jokes. He allowed her presence to comfort him without guilt, and Leary, in turn, moved with a quiet pride, a recognition that the human before her was extraordinary, not because of power or skill, but because of his heart. For the first time, John understood something vital. Strength was not only in survival, not only in enduring the horrors of the past. Strength was also in trust, in connection, in allowing oneself to be vulnerable and seen. And Leary had helped him find that strength, not by commanding him, not by serving him, but by witnessing him, accepting him, and simply being there. That night, as John lay in his bed, he glanced at Leary standing by the window watching the stars. He felt an overwhelming gratitude, a warmth in his chest he had long thought impossible. He was still scarred, still carrying the weight of his past. But for the first time, he did not feel alone. And in that quiet understanding, a new chapter of his life began. A chapter where he could be human without shame, where he could feel hope again, and where the presence of one extraordinary alien reminded him that even in the darkest moments, connection and understanding could shine brighter than any star. The night air outside the colony was still, almost eerily calm. Inside, John sat at the small table in the common room, staring at a cup of tea he had barely touched. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the mix of emotion swirling in his chest. Leary moved quietly behind him, polishing the control panels, her glowing eyes reflecting the dim light. For hours they had been silent, each lost in thought, yet bound by an unspoken understanding. John finally spoke, his voice low but firm. I've never allowed anyone to see this side of me, he admitted. Not the guilt, not the pain, not the memories that haunt me every day. I thought no one could bear it. I thought no one could understand. Leary paused, her head tilting slightly as she studied him. Human, she said softly. Your experiences are unique, yet your endurance is remarkable. You carry burdens heavier than most could survive, yet you continue. That is extraordinary. John exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of her words sink deep into his chest. He had spent years believing that survival alone was his greatest strength. But now he realized that strength could also be measured in the courage to let someone in, to share his truth, even with a being so different from himself. I've done things I regret, he whispered. I've lost people I cared about. I've made choices that I can never undo. Sometimes I feel like I'm nothing more than the mistakes I've made. His voice cracked, and he finally allowed a single tear to slip down his cheek. Leary approached slowly, her movements graceful and deliberate. She placed a hand near his shoulder, not touching, but close enough that he could feel the warmth of her presence. Human, she said gently. You are not defined solely by the past. Your actions may be recorded in memory, but they do not erase the courage and compassion you carry. You survive not just for yourself, but because you care. That is what makes you extraordinary. John's throat tightened. Her words were simple, yet they resonated more deeply than any praise or recognition he had ever received. For the first time in years, he felt seen, not as a soldier, not as a survivor, not as someone broken by guilt, but simply as a human capable of both pain and hope. He swallowed hard and looked up at her. I don't know how to thank you, he admitted. You've seen me at my worst and you haven't left. You haven't judged, you've understood. Leary's glowing eyes softened. The closest thing to a smile a meridian could show. "It is my purpose to observe and serve human," she said calmly. "But witnessing your truth has also shown me the resilience of humanity. You endure not because it is easy, but because you must. You endure because you care. That is why you are remarkable." The words struck John like a revelation. He realized that for all his solitude and pain, he had found someone who truly recognized his humanity, someone who understood that the strength of a person was not measured only in victories or survival, but in the courage to endure suffering and still choose compassion. He leaned back in his chair, letting the emotions he had long suppressed wash over him. Tears blurred his vision, but he did not care. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel, truly feel, the relief of being understood, of being accepted, of being seen. The night passed slowly, but for John it was transformative. By dawn he felt lighter, though not unburdened. The memories, the guilt, the pain, they remained. But now they existed alongside something he had long forgotten: hope. And in that hope he discovered a new kind of strength. Leary stood by the window as the twin suns rose over the barren landscape. Her eyes reflected the pale light, and she seemed almost ethereal. John approached her quietly and stood beside her. They did not speak. Words were unnecessary. Their shared silence said more than any conversation could. It was a bond forged through understanding, trust, and the quiet recognition of human resilience. John finally allowed himself to smile, a rare and genuine expression. "Maybe being human isn't just about surviving the darkness," he whispered. "Maybe it's about letting someone in, even someone who isn't like you." Leary inclined her head slightly, her soft glow steady. She had seen the truth about John, the fears, the regrets, the guilt. And in witnessing it, she had also witnessed the extraordinary strength that defined him. And in that moment, John knew something profound. He was not alone, and perhaps he never would be again. The night had revealed more than just secrets. It had revealed humanity itself, its resilience, its courage, and its capacity to be extraordinary even in the face of darkness. And in the quiet presence of a being so unlike himself, John finally understood what it truly meant to be human. The morning light poured gently through the narrow windows of the colony, casting long shadows across the floor. John sat quietly at the table, sipping a cup of tea, the warmth spreading slowly through his hands and chest. The night had been long and revealing, but for the first time in years he felt a calm he could not remember feeling before. Leary moved gracefully around the room, checking systems and straightening supplies. Her glowing eyes flickered softly as she glanced at John. There was no need for words between them anymore. The silence was filled with understanding, with trust, with the kind of quiet companionship that comes only after true vulnerability is shared. John thought back to the first night she arrived. He had been wary, distant, determined to remain alone. Yet here she was, not just a servant, but a witness, a companion, a presence that reminded him that he could be human without hiding. He had carried his past like a shadow for so long, believing that no one could survive its weight. And now Leary had not only seen him, but she had accepted him, and in that acceptance, he had discovered something extraordinary. He set down his cup and stood, moving toward the window where Leary had paused to observe the rising suns. The barren landscape stretched endlessly, but it no longer felt oppressive. Instead, it seemed full of possibilities, of moments yet to come, of hope he had not dared to imagine. "I never thought I could feel like this again," John said softly, almost to himself. "Not after everything I've done, everything I've lost. I thought the past would always control me, but maybe it doesn't have to." Leary turned to him, her glowing eyes steady and calm. "It does not have to, human. The past exists, yes, but it is not all that defines you. Your choices today, your resilience, your willingness to care despite pain, that is what shapes your humanity. That is extraordinary." John felt a lump in his throat. He had never thought of himself in such a way. He had survived, yes, but he had never believed that survival alone could be enough. Now standing with Leary, he realized that being human meant more than endurance. It meant compassion, vulnerability, hope, and the courage to keep moving forward even when life seemed unbearable. For a moment, they stood together in silence, two beings from different worlds, sharing a quiet understanding that needed no words. John realized how rare this connection was, how extraordinary it was that someone so unlike himself could see the essence of his humanity and honor it. He had faced darkness for years, both outside and within, but here, in the company of Leary, he finally felt the light. "I don't know what the future holds," John admitted, "but I know that I don't have to face it alone anymore, and that changes everything." Leary inclined her head slightly, a gesture of affirmation. "Human, you carry both strength and fragility, courage and doubt. You are remarkable because you endure, because you care, because you allow yourself to be human. You do not need to hide behind walls anymore." A quiet smile spread across John's face, one that was genuine and unguarded. For the first time in decades, he allowed himself to hope. Hope that he could build a life that honored both his past and his present. Hope that he could continue to grow, to connect, to care, and to be extraordinary simply by being human. Outside, the twin suns rose higher, casting a warm glow across the barren land. The light touched the edges of the colony, bathing the machinery, the walls, and the two unlikely companions in gold. John looked at Leary, her glowing eyes reflecting the sunlight, and felt a surge of gratitude. She had seen him at his worst, yet she had not turned away. She had reminded him that even in the darkest times, humanity had the power to endure, to hope, and to shine. "Thank you, Leary," he whispered, his voice steady and full of sincerity. "For staying, for understanding, for showing me that even in darkness, there can be light." Leary inclined her head again, silent but full of presence. She had seen the truth about John, and in that seeing, she had helped him reclaim his strength, his hope, and his humanity. And in that quiet, golden morning, John understood something profound. Humanity was not just about survival, not just about enduring pain. Humanity was about connection, compassion, courage, and the extraordinary ability to rise even when the world seemed against you. And in the presence of a being so different, he had discovered that the truth about being human, his truth, was more powerful than any secret, any burden, or any fear he had ever carried. For the first time in a long time, John smiled fully, feeling alive, seen, and ready to face whatever came next. The night of revelation had ended, but the dawn of understanding, hope, and human greatness had just begun.